Alright, assemble the blades, I suppose. Start with blade number 1. That goes in this position. Blades are all sitting in place. Now we can put the case back over the mechanism plate. So I'm just checking the alignment of this. There are 3 screws that hold the case to the mechanism plate. They are not symmetrical. The 2 closest together, one right across there. So that screw hole there, that screw hole there, and that screw hole there are the ones I'm trying to line up. So I'll just lower that case over the top, line those holes up, and the case just falls neatly into place. I've got 3 screws. They're long screws. You couldn't mix them up with anything else in the shutter. I'll run the screws in lightly until they're all in place. I'll check the action of the shutter to make sure that the blades swing freely. And if all is well, I'll turn it back over and I will just tighten those screws up completely. If a blade has become dislodged in the process of lifting the case over the mechanism plate, it could be damaged if you were to just screw these screws up tight at this stage. Alright, so we'll swing this into place. You can see the blades swing back into position. I can hook their spring back over the lever. You can see that they promptly drop into place. So I'll just nip those 3 screws up. We're done in there. And we're back to the front of the shutter and reassembling the various control levers. I'll start with the B lever. I'll drop that down there and I'm going to clean that. And I'll find its screw. That's its screw. It's quite a large head, a flat head. There is a shoulder on the screw that the lever pivots on. These components were fairly clean. I'm just giving them a swab to make sure there are no contaminants and remove any dust and dirt. This lever drops into this position. And the screw I can get it to cooperate. It goes in here. That's better. Find an appropriate screwdriver. Just making sure that that lever is settled that it's pivoting freely about that screw. And I'll nip that screw up. You never want to overdo tightening that screw, because effectively what will happen is it'll burrow a little bit deeper into the mechanism plate and bind that lever up, and the lever won't work smoothly. Two more components. The high-speed spring and this lever here. I'll apply just a touch of lubricant, molybdenum this is, to the pivot of that lever and some to the inside of this spring. The spring drops over that large post. And I'm just swinging it round because it's got to be on the other side of that pin. That's better. This lever drops into the case below it. Just getting that settled into place, and roll its spring into position. That's trapped in a little groove in the side of the case. That's good. That spring's in place. This little lever, I mentioned earlier that one of its functions was to prevent you being able to depress the shutter release if the shutter wasn't actually cocked. Well, that's sort of its secondary purpose actually. Its main purpose is to hold the shutter cocked and release the shutter when you press the shutter release. And I didn't mention that. But that's the case. So I'll swing this around. This fits in. There's a hole in the mechanism plate, and the large rivet post on here, the pivot, that has to drop into that hole. It's inclined not to go squarely, and you might have to muck around to get that thing to seat correctly. Part of that's because the hole is on a machined surface. It's not dead flat. It's beveled off on one side, so it's easy for that component to lead in less than straight. That looks good. I'll just run its screw up. Now the end of that spring needs to hook behind the B lever there. So it provides tension to this piece, and it also provides tension to the B lever. A shutter release lever. I'll give that a wipe. Now I'm looking at this, and the end doesn't look very square. That shaft is not sticking out square with the lever. That tells me that it's been bent intentionally or bent accidentally. But one way or the other I'm going to have to straighten that up. Okay, I'm a bit happier about the shape of that lever. So I'll apply a tiny bit of lubricant, molybdenum paste, to these surfaces and the centre, and we'll drop this into position. Make sure it moves smoothly, and it does. And we're running out of things to put back in the shutter now. So this spring here, which is the main drive ring, that needs to go on. We'll pop the shutter to one side and we'll clean these components up. Here's our outer cover, front cover. I'll just wipe that, get rid of any dirt and rubbish off it. It is a bit dirtier, but then that's the outside cover, so that's hardly surprising. Again, I'd like to get rid of any grease and contaminants from that from the inside, because old grease tends to be sticky and it acts more as a glue than the lubricant, and creates drag, stops components from moving freely. We'll clean this. This is the shutter speed setting ring. And these cam surfaces here swing in levers on the retard gear train and control the speed that the retard gear train runs at effectively, or more truthfully, that controls the distance the levers has to move. I've got a battery going flat here. I'm going to stop. Hopefully that battery's got a bit more oomph to it. We'll soon find out. So our main drive lever, I need to clean this. This always comes up fairly dirty, but that's to be expected. This part is always lubricated and it needs to be lubricated. It applies quite a bit of force to various things, and with that spring on there, it certainly needs to be dealt to. So, a bit of molybdenum paste, and what am I going to do? I'm going to run around the inside edge. That's where it revolves around the centre of the mechanism plate. Run around the outside edge. That's where these various cam surfaces engage. Now this piece, this little piece here, is called the bird paw, and that actuates the blades, flips the lever that turns the blades, and it has to swing back past them, coming back, and it looks vaguely like a bird, hence the name. Alright, see if we can get this ring in place. I've got to pull back that B lever out of the way. Pull back the other lever on that retard gear train, and that one, that B lever. Get this thing settled, get the bird paw settled in place. Something is stopping me moving. Get my spring settled over the post. Checking that everything is settled correctly in position. That's not sitting flat. That's better. That's better. So far so good. So this component requires a little bit of lubricant. Molybdenum paste again. In the centre where it turns around the centre of the mechanism plate. This outer piece here, that's where the high-speed spring runs and is forced into position by rotating this ring. There's a bit of fluff showing up there. I'll see if we can remove that. That's better. This cam surface here that sets the shutter speeds, just making sure that's got a bit of lubricant on it. And we'll see if we can set this in place. See a bit of fluff there, I don't want that. Of course that was tight coming off. Alright, I'll pull that B lever back out of the way because it was fouling. Alright, in the B position, the shutter opens and closes. Let's try a tenth of a second. Here I'm lining up my speed with that notch in the case, which is very roughly where the alignment mark should be. That sounds believable to me. I think that's good. I'm just checking everything, make sure everything here is sitting correctly. There's a lever here that's might be sitting slightly proud, slightly high. I'm just not sure about that. I'm just going to check the position of that. I think that lever may be sitting slightly high. No, there's enough clearance there, that should be good. So our cover plate can go on. And I'll rotate that cutaway pinhead screw to lock it in position. The slow speed train moves smoothly and sounds good. The aperture setting is smooth. I got that lever straightened out, so I'm happy about that. So basically that's done. Now I need to find the cover plate because the Kodak nameplate was missing on here, and I've got a spare. I've got to find that and its retaining screws and then fit those. Well, after a great deal of hunting around, I did discover the plate, which wasn't so much trouble to find, but finding the screws for the plate was much trickier. So let's see if we can get this settled in place. The screws run into a countersunk position, so they're countersunk screws, but they don't have a flat head, they have a raised head to give them a rounded appearance. And originally they would have been chromed. Now one of those has a distinct nickel look to me, but I don't think that'll hold us back. So we have our nameplate, just removing any dirt from that front plate. There's the shutter. Now we need to clean and fit the lenses. And make sure that the retaining ring is cleaned, and then that can be reinstalled in the body. Oh, a little bit of glass cleaner. These are uncoated lenses, so they never have quite the same sparkle as a coated lens, but they should be quite clear. I rotate the cotton bud as I apply it, so that I'm always presenting a fresh surface to the glass, and then there's less danger of picking up some abrasive fragment and dragging it around the glass. That's good. That's our rear lens group, and I'm just screwing that in with my fingers, and to be honest, that's all that's required there. So the front group, you can cut through a lot of cotton buds doing these. That's fine, cotton buds are cheap. And I'm checking the reflections I can see in that, on the back surface of that lens, so that I can pick if there are any specks of dirt or oils or any other problem on there, but that all looks good. Now the front surface. The front surface is usually the worst. We'll have spent the last 70 years exposed to the atmosphere, and possibly more importantly, exposed to the tail of anyone's t-shirts, handkerchiefs, or if pressed and they've got nothing else to wipe the lens, their thumb. And I'll hold that up to the window and check that it looks good, and there's a certain amount of cloudiness there. I'm just trying to get an idea of where that is. That may or may not be on the front surface. I'm going to try dismantling this lens and see if I can get to one of the inside surfaces. So I'll loosen that up and bring you back. Alright, well that actually came loose quite easily. I just used a pointed tool to loosen that up. That's not always the case. Sometimes things are very, very reluctant to move. So now we have this in two sections. And I can clean the available surfaces. Of course, one of these components is very probably a cemented pair, and of course you have no access to that particular surface. But for the surfaces we do have access to, I need to make sure that they are clean, free from any cloudiness, fungus, anything of that nature. Often cloudiness in lenses, particularly the innermost surfaces, is caused by oils that have deposited on the glass in the same way that oils will deposit onto shutter blades. I'm just going to use the tips of my tweezers to nip that up, and I'm going to check that against the light again. And I'm looking for cloudiness, and I do see some cloudiness, but now I know where it isn't. There's a little thread of something there too, like cotton. I'll open that up and check that I didn't introduce any dust. And there it is, little piece of cotton. It's very reluctant to move. Must be caught on a piece of roughness. Yeah, it was. We don't want that. It's supposed to be cleaner when we finished than when we started, not the other way around. We tend to think of glass as unchanging, that as long as no one has put a scratch in a piece of glass, the glass will be good forever. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily true. Glass can react with elements in the atmosphere, and some glass does, and it deteriorates. Yes, I'm a lot happier with that. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. Just stepped away to get a friction tool, and I want to tighten that front lens group up. That's all that's required. And our retaining ring just needs to be cleaned to make sure there's no oil and dirt in there. The threads are clean so that when I reassemble it, it'll go smoothly. That's all that's required there. I'm going to check that thread to make sure this does screw on smoothly, and it does. So the shutter is ready to be reassembled to the camera body, and that will be the last task for this particular job, and I'll do that now.